On our last call, you had told me about this study that you did with sex workers, the 40% study. I would love for you to say more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, my background is in tech, so whenever you build tech before you start building or briefing engineers, you do research with users. So for us, because we wanted to make paid companionship across the spectrum, so including intimacy, more accessible in a safe and ethical way, there are different areas where paid companionship exists. Um, and one area is paid companionship exists embedded within sex work. So as society, we call it sex work, but it it's not it doesn't revolve just around sex. So what I did is in a first step is I made about 5,500 calls to sex workers. That's because that the phone numbers are publicly available. So that's technically a relatively easy audience to call and ask, hey, do you have 5 minutes for some questions? I'm doing this research for this company. And out of the 5,500 calls, I actually talked to 732 sex workers or people who would say or identify as belonging to the sex work community. And I asked them, what percentage of meetings would you say is non-sexual? So it can include proximity or non-sexual intimacy. So holding hands or hugging would be considered intimate but not sexual. And well, surprising to me, consensus answer was about 40%. So that's the 40% study. I have to say that obviously there's a bias in which people took time to answer the questions and also the location where these people are based. So most of those sex workers were based in the German-speaking European region, so namely Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, and some of them in the US and Australia.
We need to dig deeper into that because that's such a
Sure.
fascinating and potentially terrifying statistic. So, I guess taking a step back from that, first of all, sex work, as we talked about before, that's kind of a misnomer. It doesn't encompass the full scope of what they're doing right now. But we use paid intimacy. What is the difference between sex work and paid intimacy in that way?
So what I figured in the research is like also on the customer side, right? Because there's also the question when you talk to potential customers, you say, would you pay someone for companionship? Um, would you pay someone to spend time with you? Would you also consider paying them if you knew they would also offer, intimate services? And there's I think part of what makes paid companionship less or inaccessible is the booking process. So how it is requested or offered. And the other thing is, I think also how we label different segments of the services. So part of it is it doesn't have if somebody is interested in paying another person to spend time with them for dinner or lunch or holding hands, it doesn't help in terms of accessibility if we wrap a, a sexual term around it, like sex work, right? So that's really what I came across. Like there's so many nuances. That's why I always refer to the paid companionship spectrum, meaning there's so to answer your question, paid intimacy in our terminology would be um, intimate services. So can include physical touch, but is non-sexual in nature. And proximity would we would call can involve physical touch, but wouldn't be deemed intimate, right? And then companionship is doesn't involve physical touch at all.
So there's like this traditional way to view sex workers, or I mean, let's just be completely blunt, but hookers or prostitutes, any of these terms. Um, you find them in a certain place and they're just there for sex and then you leave. But this again doesn't encompass the full scope of what that job does and what that entire line of work entails. So, what is the difference between what you're doing in terms of the technology that you've built and the platform that we've been discussing versus the quote unquote traditional way of going about and finding them?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we have to recognize there are certain terms that exist and that even are embedded into the judicial system, like they're used in legal texts or in official documents, but they're derogatory in nature. So, for example, hooker or prostitute or prostitution can be deemed derogatory. I mean, there is a part of the community um, that that deems these terms as empowering, but I think it always depends who's using them. So I like my perception, or based on the research I've done, if you're not part of the community, using these terms is derogatory. So I don't use the terms. I use people who would consider themselves to be part of the sex work community, sex workers, or companions, or providers of paid companionship, paid intimacy, paid proximity, body workers. There are lots of terms that we can use that will not offend anyone. Um, so I think that's first and foremost. And other than that, I think the problem is we have these images or perceptions because that's what the media portrays. And the media is portraying a very polarizing message. And I mean, now we also have to look at it in a geographical context, right? So even in Switzerland, where we decriminalized sex work in 1947, I think, well, heterosexual sex work, I have to say. And then for homosexual sex work, it took another 50 years. Um, but like even in Switzerland, those terms are used or are used interchangeably without people recognizing that there are different areas in the community, different people in the community with, different personal situations, different motivations. And somehow we are mixing terms or using very, very high level terms to describe a very nuanced spectrum of both people and services. That's like, I don't know, using using the term worker to describe 10 different professions. And I think we have to just recognize that sex work, the way we label it right now, so including companionship and proximity and intimacy and BDSM, we we have to understand that we are using a very, very broad terminology to describe a cross section of society, because at every stage of society you can find providers um, and customers of some form of paid companionship.
What is paid companionship meant to be in that way? So again, on the pre-call and just for full transparency, before this podcast, we usually have a 15 to 20-minute pre-call to go over topics like this and see where the interests and alignment are. So we talked about before, like people asking for BDSM tutorials, being able to chat with somebody and being able to talk with them and explore fantasies. Can you say more about that? The fact that that really doesn't exist in society, like there's no place for that conversation to exist outside of paid companionship
Yeah, so that's an
services?
interesting result. So currently, the most frequently booked service on our platform is our educational sessions. So 20 to 35-year-olds are meeting with professionals, so either BDSM professionals or sex work or body work professionals, to have coffee and just ask questions in a judgment-free setting. But there's no physical touch. There's just questions and answers about what they're interested in knowing. And I think this puts a very interesting perspective on, the sex work community as a community that has an incredible amount of know-how. But the know-how is not really accessible because the platforms where a lot of the platforms, not all of them, but a lot of platforms, a lot of directories where sex workers advertise are heavily nudging towards intimacy or sexual intimacy. So if you're just interested to have coffee, you may not even know that that's an option, and it's made a bit inaccessible. I mean, it's a huge barrier for a lot of people. Safety barrier as well. You don't know who's behind the number. There may be a lack of verification. So that's what we call education or educational companionship. Paid companionship, like the way it's also booked on or requested on Choice, is just paying someone to spend time with you on your terms. So I always bring this example, like for example, if you my grandmother, right now she's that's a good effect right there. So my grandmother is super like in good shape, and my granddad is not in great shape anymore. So it's just reality in like at one point, he will not be with us anymore, and she may live another 10 to 15 years. I personally think it should be possible, it should be an option for her to be able, or for us as relatives, to be able to have a safe and ethical way to request someone to spend time with her. Like going to the museum, going to the opera, on top of what we do as a family, as a complementary service, but not through a sex work application. Not through an application that, not because it's sex work, but not through an application or a platform that insinuates sexual intimacy, right? And that's what our vision is for paid companionship, that you can actually, in a very precise way, request it, so that and that providers can signal and say, hey, I like to provide companionship to elderly people or people with disabilities, or people with a specific gender identity or a cross-gender identity.
I think this is the point in the conversation where we're going to be a little bit fluid in terms of being in terms of pushback. And I want to explore that more because a lot of questions arise when it comes to paid
Mhm.
companionship and paid intimacy. Number one, and the thing that I feel like my brain is immediately saying as you're explaining the situation with your grandmother, which is, why do we need to pay somebody for that? Why can't we ask friends to do that? Like, how it has happened in human society that we have to pay for somebody to hang out with our grandmother? Is that a fair
Absolutely, yeah.
question,
I,
by
I
the
mean,
way?
I get it all the time. I also debate it in, like anywhere at conferences or in my personal life. Um, so I think it's a matter of perspective. So you are saying, do we have to pay someone? Um, there's many situations where we don't have to pay anyone for a service, but we choose to do so, like hairdressers, right? Or barbers, or like a lot of the wellness experiences in general. Like there's so many professional services that we choose to pay for, even though we could ask a friend or we could ask someone to do it as a favor. And I think the point is having the option to decide, or the choice, pun intended, um, whether or not you want to ask someone as a favor or as a genuine unpaid, you know, um, gathering, meeting, whatever you want to call it, friendship, acquaintance, or whether you are in a special situation that requires a service, like, take a therapist, for example, right? You could also talk to a friend, but many people choose to talk to a therapist for various reasons, because of experience, because of training, because of the setting, etc. So I think the same applies to companionship. Um, and the options right now are just very limited, right? So take a take a business traveler, right? Maybe they spent the entire day in meetings, And then in the evening, they want to have dinner, but they don't want to have dinner alone. But they're in a happy relationship. They also don't want to go on a dating app because they're not interested in a date. They're just interested or looking for companionship, right? And then, look at this across age, across demographics like gender identities and age groups. I mean, right now we are, even in sex work and paid companionship, we are excluding female clients due to the lack of a safety layer in almost all of the directories or platforms.
That is really interesting because immediately as you talk about how we pay for barbers or therapists, I would actually want to pay for somebody to be with my grandmother instead of wanting a friend there because when you pay for that service, you expect a level of professionalism. Like my barber is not half on his phone. He's fully present in the profession. And so in that way, if I paid for companionship for my grandmother, I would expect that level of professionalism where that person is fully present, fully with her for the duration of that time.
Yeah, I think the issue really is that people are thinking in a binary way. Like, do I have only genuine connections? And that when I say genuine, I mean unpaid, but I shouldn't say that actually, because a lot of paid companionship services are super genuine, arguably more genuine than the unpaid interactions. So that's an interesting, area as well. But I think that's where the criticism is coming from in a lot of people's thinking is it's either or, but it's not. It's just a complementary, it should be a complementary service that is there in case you need it. But if you don't need it, you don't have to, request it, but you could.
Right. It's the social stigma as well. It's not something that if I say I'm going to the barber, nobody bats an eye. If I say I'm going to go to, I'm booking a sex worker, then people will start looking at me a bit differently. Um, what is there's also this aspect of it feels a little bit
Mhm.
cold and sad that I have to pay for companionship. And as soon as the hour or however the event is done, it's just, shake hands and leave. What is that, aspect of human connection that I guess our societal inability to comprehend that?
I think it's just a matter of, well, lack of experience, really. um, Lack of experience. So lack of experience, and I guess part of it is branding as well, and prejudice. So it was the same journey with therapy, psychotherapy. Like it, there used to be a time where it was like, oh, you're seeing a therapist, you're sick. What's your problem? Why are you seeing a therapist? You know, and I feel it's like a little bit of the same dynamic here. So you are looking at it as or the way you formulated it was from a perspective of weakness, like I have to pay for companionship because I can't get it in an unpaid way. I would argue that and those situations definitely exist, but even in that situation, I would say it's better to be able to request a professional service, pay for it, and be outside or at any activity that helps you get out of this vicious cycle of isolation or loneliness, um, than not having that option. And for the remainder, I would say it's an empowering, it's an empowering situation. I can choose to have a meeting, a dinner, an opera visit where I am the center of attention because it's a service. So whatever mood I'm in, I don't have to justify because it's a service.
Which, okay, so you did say a little while back that you get this pushback in events and also in your personal life. What pushback specifically do you get? Obviously, I'm not trying to dig into your personal life, but that is interesting that there is so much pushback there. And is it the same kind of questions that we're asking today, or do they
No, no, no.
revolve
I
around
think
another set of
it's
things?
just I think um the issue that a lot of people have. I mean, first of all, companionship as a service is quite new because the word that people remember is escorting and they associate it with sexual services as well. So I think the pushback or what's what a lot of people don't understand is they think that because something is paid, because it's a service, it's transactional. Like I do this, you pay me for that. Um, and I think the association line is that because it's paid and transactional, it's also not genuine. And I think we have this feeling that if something is not genuine or if it's not out of our own will, completely free will, then we think it's a bad thing. And that's why I said before, I could make the argument that a lot of the meetings that are paid in paid companionship are arguably a lot more genuine than some of the unpaid meetings that people have. Just because a lot of the providers, I mean, I do video verification calls with almost all the providers on our platform. I can say that from those conversations, a lot of the providers are genuinely loving their occupation. They have an above average empathy level, and they genuinely like to keep other people company or provide proximity or even intimacy or even sexual intimacy or BDSM services.
Speaking of that, that brings up an interesting segue or tangent. Who are the people providing these connections and these paid companionship services? Why are they doing that just from your understanding? Obviously, you can't dig into the specifics of each person, but in general.
Like I said before, it's a cross section of society. So there's definitely a bias on the platform just because we have a very rigid, not moderation, but verification process. So people need to invest time um, going through those steps, and not everybody feels comfortable doing that. But the ones that are published on our on Choice are literally a cross section through society. So some of them started, with paid companionship or body work or sex work out of boredom, just because they, I don't know, were professional actors before, and then they were on a tour and there was nothing to do, and then they liked intimacy or sex, and then they started offering it as a service. Others have a day job in technology or consulting, and they just like it as a personal broadening of their horizon to also offer companionship as a service. Um, Others are retired themselves, and they say, well, I have nothing to do or not much to do, and if I can help somebody else or keep someone company, um, and get paid for the travel and the time, I'm super happy to do that. So it's really I the red line across the providers on Choice is not how they started this profession or work or line of work or how they got to Choice. I think the red line is um, they all have an above average level of empathy. Um, they are all conducting these activities in a self-determined way, and they genuinely like what they do. But it's different age, different background, different income level, um, different education level, intellectual level. So it's really a cross section, I would say, through society.
It's a fascinating step for us to walk towards because I feel like there is so much friction in this. I can just hear people screaming, I don't want to pay for companionship or intimacy. Why are you? And people, I think, will be hostile because they'll feel like this platform or service is taking away the raw connections that are possible. Even though it's not when you look at it just for 10 seconds more, but the immediacy of that feeling is there. How do we combat that? Because while it's helping other people feel like it's
Well, I
taking
mean,
away
we
something from
first
them.
have to ensure that what we're doing so I think that's what we spent a lot of time with is how can we make this as safe as possible and ethical and accessible across gender identities and age groups, right? So that's really the essence, because I think that's where we have to start, because that's also where a lot of the stigma comes from. That also the media portrays a lot of situations where providers are not doing this out of their own will. They are being coerced. Um, so there's an image that we first have to correct, and I think the image that the media portrays, based on my own research, is just not correct. So it's factually incorrect. Um, so and I mean, we analyzed about 150,000 X accounts that have indications that there's a that the services provided are around paid companionship or paid intimacy. It's um, the way the accounts are constructed and the way the posts are made, etc., and the displays. It's highly unlikely that what the media determines to be, 95, 98% coerced work. It's highly unlikely. I mean, there's no indication that that is true. Not saying that there isn't an illegal part or portion of that industry, but we will find that in a lot of other sectors too.
And what countries do you operate in right now? What is stopping this from becoming more mainstream in the United States
So
or
we
in
we
Canada
operate
where I
globally
am?
already. It's just a matter of provider signups. So providers can sign up from anywhere. We always make sure that we limit the service spectrum to whatever is legally permitted in each jurisdiction. So it is technically impossible for someone to request a service that is not legal in that jurisdiction. And I think that's really how we have to start making this more mainstream. Um, and I think that's how we can show that there's a lot of opportunity in this from a knowledge perspective, from a, combating social anxiety perspective, combating loneliness, combating isolation, but also just combating circumstantial aloneness. I mean, look at divorce rates, right? I mean, if you can ask any divorce lawyer, I mean, the top reasons for any divorce are statistically money, intimacy, or kids, right? Or job, I think. Those are the top four, I think. So you have one of the top four reasons, and there's huge know-how about that too in the sex work community. And um, it's just sort of sealed off because it's highly inaccessible, like that know-how.
I want to go two ways. Which, so I want to ask you, what is your perfect vision for this? And how do we stop this Uber problem? So the Uber problem is essentially Uber started off as a really great idea. It was, really well received. Everybody found value in it. If you were a driver, you were paid pretty well. But now it's not really the case. Uber takes like 50 to 75% of the profits, and to be an Uber driver is pretty hellish. Um, that problem I can see potentially happening with platforms like Choice, where it starts off as a really good idea and people are getting a lot of benefit from it, but down the line, certain things happen that corrupts it and takes away the power and forces people into pretty dangerous or uncomfortable situations. Is that a fair potential? Is that something that we should be thinking about? How do we stop that kind of capitalistic incentive from taking place?
Absolutely. I think you can make that argument with any company. I mean, so it'll always, like, you will always have to have, an ethical mindset in order for your company and business to be ethical. Um, I think there are legal structures or um, legal ways of how to ensure that. It's just a matter of, do you want that as a founder? So, for example, for us, what we made sure of in the beginning is there's a foundation where 5% of the of the stock, of the profits, and the employee's time is going into, sort of like the Salesforce 111 model. So no matter what happens in the future, a part of this is anyway going back to the community. Other than that, I mean, now we're too small, but there's like, look at Novo Nordisk, for example. I mean, it belongs to a foundation. Um, the majority shareholder ensures that whatever profits are made are being reinvested in the research and development um, of that company. So I think there are ways of ensuring it or in like solidifying it in your legal structure, in the way you operate as a business. But in the end of the day, it starts, I guess, or like it, I mean, it stops um, with management and the founders of the company. So that's my personal conviction, that we should run this company as an ethically minded business, and that's how we pick investors, and that's also, I think, what the community values. And in the end, the users, so the providers and the clients are um, have the final say, right? So uh, if they start not using the service or objecting to it, then it'll get very difficult, or competitors will emerge.
Who are you? What are your morals and ethics, and why did you get into this? You could have been doing anything else with your life, but why did you pick this community and this industry?
So I was specifically looking, so my background is in tech, and before we built a B2B SaaS company here in Zurich as well, we bootstrapped it, we sold it, and I took 2 years off, and I was specifically looking for an intersection of tech and societal impact. And in my research, I came across aloneness. So not just loneliness, but aloneness. And I was asking myself, well, looking at the macro statistics, loneliness is going up, social anxiety is going up, dating app burnout is going up. Yet we struggle to define a safe and ethical way of accessing companionship in the form of a service. And I really see it as sort of a uh, beneficial or well, to a certain extent, wellness service as well. So so that's how I started to research, and then looking at functional companionship like elderly care, um, tour guides, drivers as well to a certain extent, where companionship may be part of the service, but it's not the focus. And then on the other spectrum, or the other end of the spectrum, sex work, and how all of these services are advertised. And I just found there was a huge gap in building something around a nuanced presentation of the paid companionship spectrum. So that's why I decided to build a company around this.
And in all your years doing this, what has been the biggest misconception or biggest like frustration for you to explain to people that people just for some reason don't get, or you can explain it to them 5 times, but they're still going to forget for the sixth time? What is that? If we could just inject this meme into society and have it stick, what is that perfect explanation that you would like to put out?
The most frustrating thing was, or is, stigma, and it's in both ways. So the provider community specifically, is experiencing stigma from a part of society. But me as a male founder, I'm also experiencing stigma or prejudice or misconception from the provider community, or part of the provider community, because of I would say, historical trauma that was just, in the majority of cases, caused by men. Um, and I think that was very frustrating, because we're building in public. The platform is public. So we are not charging providers anything right now. We are even absorbing the transaction costs. We've arguably built the safest platform out there for paid companionship or intimacy meetings. Um, Yet there's still the skepticism around what's the intention of this person or of the founding team. And I think that's frustrating, but also just takes time, I think. We just have to prove ourselves.
And what advice would you give to basically anybody, whether they're a future provider or a future client? How do we begin to have a real tight knit and in a paradoxical way looser conversation around paid companionship and paid intimacy? Because it's here, it's very beneficial for some people, and I really do think that with more time and effort and money and cultural, how would you say, and cultural embedding, it can be a service that we just see as part of society.
I mean, there are examples, like look at Japan. Paid companionship is super embedded in society there. So uh, there are examples of it. We also have examples of it. So, to a certain extent, I recently had this discussion on another podcast, but to a certain extent, uh, services offered by the church is also companionship. There is companionship services that is offered by the church. Like when somebody is in trouble, um, somebody else will go there and support that person. That is a form of indirect paid companionship. Um, so I think we just have to recognize that it's already present in so many ways, and that it is actually to a certain extent already culturally embedded. It's just the way how we access it that is different, or that may strike people um, as not according to their values, or not yet according to their values.
If you had a magic wand and you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be and why?
Legislation around this sector, I think that's a big part as well, or a big root cause of the issue, and also a big area of debate. Um, so that's what I would address first.
Can you say more about legislation?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, the decriminalization of the entire spectrum of paid companionship, including bodywork, intimacy and sexual intimacy, and BDSM, which in most countries is criminalized. And there's a lot of debate around the Nordic model, which basically criminalizes the purchase of these services, but not the provision of the service. So the intention of that policy was to protect providers and punish clients. The result in the result from the provide That's also why the provider community, or also like humanitarian organizations are against that kind of legalization, like Amnesty International and so forth, is that what it does is it doesn't eradicate the market. It adversely selects the clients. So clients who are typically adhering to boundaries, legal regulations or legal boundaries, potentially also the boundaries of the providers, the personal boundaries, are not operating in a criminalized environment anymore. So who's left are the clients that are potentially not respecting boundaries, legal boundaries, or the personal boundaries of the providers, putting them in a more difficult position, accepting clients they would have otherwise refused, potentially offering services they would have otherwise not offered. And I think that's what legal or decriminalization would solve. And then a cultural embedding of paid companionship is also that the ability to switch between, or to move on the paid companionship spectrum, potentially starting offering one segment and then moving to another, or broadening or narrowing the service spectrum that any individual provider wants to offer. And that's right now quite difficult, because the demand is not there yet because it's unclear how to access that part of the spectrum.
As a last question, what gives you hope in the world?
Societal progress. I think as society, over time, even if sometimes it doesn't look like it, we are moving forward. And if I look back, I think in terms of even though we're far away from there yet, we have moved forward in terms of equality and diversity and inclusion rather than exclusion.
I love it. Well, Arik, this has been a great conversation. Um, I think you had a really important company and a really important intersection, as you said, between social impact and technology. So I really appreciate somebody like you who has thought deeply about these things. It's really refreshing. Where can we find you online to support you?
Um, so online it's choice.ch and saferchoice.ch, and then on Instagram it's saferchoice.ch, TikTok, X.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to have you back for a part two and talk more about this. But for today, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a pleasure.